middle of his Gimel. He's talking about two ways of birur, milamayla lamata, from above to below, and milamata lamayla, from below to above. From above to below is the natural birur that happens mitzad the eibishter's kavana of the emergence of Seder Shtalshalos. He explained how the system works, and we pointed out that this is reflected in the way the body works, which is a microcosm of Ishtalshalos. That is, that the higher elements, the higher nutrients, or the higher, in our case, the higher sparks of Olam HaToyu are absorbed in the higher worlds. The lower sparks are then rejected, which then become the higher sparks, become the sparks of that world, and so the process continues downward. The last point he said was in identifying or describing the difference between the klippa, as it were, of Atzilus and the klippa of Bina, of Bria rather, is and that's that psoilus of Atzilus. The psoilus of Atzilus is only in the midas, whereas the psoilus of Bina is manifest in Chochma Bina of Bria. And explained that we offered an explanation that in Atzilus that means what's the yeshus of Atzilus? That I love God. He says in Tanya about a tzaddik, the mata, no matter what level he reaches, it's still yesh misha'oyev. That's the dark of Atzilus. The Chochma and Bina, the seichel of Atzilus, is the objective truth of Hashem. And he says in Tanya that the Ein Sof is expressed in Chochma because of its bittul. But here in Bina, in Bria rather, even the Chochma and Bina, we're translating this in avodah, but that's what it means, l'mayla, that even the Chochma Bina is tainted with a sense of yeshus, that I understand. And that, he says, is a much more difficult klippa. Because if there's fundamentally, not even intellectually, there's no real objectivity, then much more difficult to refine. If there's objectivity, at least in seichel, then there can be a discussion. But if that's tainted by, I need to win the argument, or I understand, then a much more difficult challenge. I'm just translating this in avodah. We'll be talking the inyan the way it is, l'mayla. So continuing now the description, we're on page Reish Tzamach Dalid, and we're describing the process of Ishtalshalos / the birur, the process of refinement that happens milamayla lamata. So we're up to actually Kiyadua, the number 14 in the text. Just 1 second. Yeah. So number 14 in the text is continuing the point we're just saying now, that the birur of Bria is more difficult because there what's tainted is even seichel. So Kiyadua, it's not being Eretz Keni Knisi v'Kadmoni. The Eibishter promised Avraham the land which is still occupied by 10 nations. L'Poel, Yeshua only conquered the land occupied by the 7, namely the west of the Yarden, the east of the Yarden, he didn't conquer. The end was that Shevet Gad and Shevet Reuven on half, the Shevet Menashe did get a portion there. And that was because they requested it, which we're going to read about soon, Parshas Matos. And that's explaining Chassidus why, because the three, Keni, Knizin, Kadmoni, which is Amin, Edom, and Moav, so that corresponds to the different names for Keni, Knizin, Kadmoni, correspond to Gimel Moichen. So Yeshua was not mandated to conquer it because Shabir Shalahem Yirak La'asid Lava. The beard of Moichen will only be when Mashiach comes. Now the Avodah is only the middle, which is why he conquered the land of the 7 nations. That's why he conquered the 7. But only when Mashiach will come can there be the bitter even of the intellect, that the intellect is purged itself from any agenda. It's a pure objective truth. So just to elaborate there for a moment, so that's why Chassidus was revealed as Achon for Be'ez Mashiach. Chassidus is the beginning of the Birur HaMoichin. Chassidus Chabad Dafke, where the intellect is beginning to have an understanding of the truth of Alikus. That also explains why even under Moishe Rabbeinu, under his watch as it were, since he's the Nasi, he is the enduring Nasi. So therefore, even under his watch, there had to be the beginning of that kibush. Not entirely, but in some part. And that's why Shevet Menashe, by his consent, did settle in those territories. They didn't last. They were conquered first before everybody else disappeared. But there was a foothold there because everything that happens, Lased Lavoi, has to be set in motion by Moishe Rabbeinu, the first Redeemer and the final Redeemer. So there was some element of that settlement, but the full developed Eretz Yisrael, the entire Eretz Yisrael, which embrace the eastern side of the Jordan, so that will be lost at love, and it's just mentioned Chassidus is achana for that. On a very simple, practical level, starting with the Baal Shem Tov, one of the great missions of Chassidus was to purge the scholars of their arrogance, and to make the Talmud Chacham, to engender a true envy of the simple Jew and his simplicity and his wholesomeness and his humility. That was one of the big avodas which met with a lot of resistance because it was perceived as being this disparaging of scholarship, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, and here the Baal Shem Tov is coming along and singing the virtues of the simple Jew, unheard of, and moreover, critical of the Talmidei Chachamim. That's the beginning of this bitter of the Gimel Moichin. Kachana for Lased Lavoi. Then came Chassidus Chabad, took it a whole new level, the Alter Rebbe, and introducing the mind to Alikus Atzmos Mamish. Continuing, so we're now by the number, a few lines down for the number 15. First word on the page. Continuing the description of the downward journey, as it were, the bitter, that the same pattern continues over and over again, that the higher elements of the Nitzutzik Dusha of Elam HaTorah become the higher world. The lower elements are rejected, there becomes a lower world, and so it continues till our world, which is the final rejection, like the human body, it finally expels, and it's not pretty, and that's Elam Hazeh. Is continuing the description. So after that which after that, which was these sparks rejected, as it were, by in the Elam Atzilus, and now become incorporated in Bria in Shanisha the Nafal Bitzira. So now the rejection, the lowest sparks, Psoilus there. The dross, excuse me, which remains and falls now to Yitziru, Begasas Odios, that's even a greater dross, a greater klipper, Kiddush, a klipper, Yitzira Yeshba, that in Yitzira, what needs to be refined there is Leirak Midas Umeichin, but even a greater challenge, like the lower you go, it's higher elements of the soul, which therefore fall lower. Elagam B'chinas HaRotzen. In Olam HaYitzira, what we have to contend with there is even the tainted of the Rotzen of a Yid, which in the higher worlds is pure, has now been compromised. I'm translating this in Avodah. Shrina Makifim, the Klippa, this is transcendent levels of Klippa, which are even more difficult than Seichel. Rotzen, it's a deeper part of the person, and if his will isn't there, then nothing works. So in elevating the bitter, the rotzen, and therefore the mayitzira, it's a coarser clipper, it falls lower, it's a bigger challenge. And then comes the clipper dasiya gasa yosef. The clipper of elamasiya is even more coarse. And what that is, what that parallels is, the highest falls therefore the lowest. Shebchinas atik the clipper. This is tainuk. Not just what I want, but this touches on the essential self. Where's your pleasure? It's more than what you want in life. It's where are you expressed in your deepest way? Where does the etzem lie? That's an even more difficult clipper. Explained in that maamar over there. It's a lashon pasuk. Tar means a gate, the rented gate, whatever the context there is. So for kol zeh, so again, the bit of paradox here is that the lower olamas invested in them are the pnimi is the highest parts. Just to kind of a contradiction. He said before that the higher elements of the how did this whole thing begin? That the higher nitzutzik dusha are absorbed in the higher worlds. He doesn't say actually high, he says hayose tovim. The first, in the higher worlds, the sparks to be elevated are the easier ones. It's not much higher, but easier ones. And the more difficult sparks, which therefore fall lower, when things crash, the higher something is, the deeper it falls. So the higher sparks of Matoyo fall lower. And therefore they're more difficult, they're enveloped in a greater clipper. As we just pointed out, in Olam HaYitzira and Olam HaAsiya, Yitzira is the rotzen of the sparks corresponding to rotzen. In Olam HaAsiya is the tainuk. Those elements, the keser of Pnimius HaKeser of Olam HaToyu falls in the Olam HaAsiya. This is all part of why the Neshama comes down the Mata, Dafka, because here's the highest sparks and the deepest connection, the tainug in the course in the deepest way is expressed here, and so on. For call kind of clear, kind of, generally speaking. Yeah? So it's a sugya, an elaborate sugya in Chassidus and the Moishe and other places, which in theory, we're supposed to know before we learn this mind. But something. On one level, that's expectation. Any mind that the Rebbe says the expectation is that you've learned everything till now, and now he's adding a whole new chiddush. But for us, often everything is new, and we need the footnotes to refer us and get a bit of an insight. It's paltry kind of learning, but that's what it is. We have to learn there is my mother. We don't have the luxury starting with the Kotetera and then learning Bipina and God, all the way to our generation. Rabbi knows this and still said the Maimer. Aside from the fact that saying the Maimer is a birur in the world and it's Mshachav Alikus, whether you know it, learn it, or present, or even know about it, aside from that. What we describe now is the quote-unquote natural process as the Eibishter manifests and produces this evolutionary process of birur. Again reflected in the way the physical natural body is born. It all happens and the whole cause and effect, the whole tzimtzum and the ilav olul, and the result is we just described. Lower worlds, progressively lower worlds, but invested in them higher and higher sparks, deeper sparks of Olam HaTorah that have fallen lower in greater klippa, lower worlds. Yes, this is this will be for this other. So this birur can be seen, the refinement in each of the worlds according to its level, creating higher and lower worlds. Batzilus, like your guru Batzilus, it says no evil touches you. That goes not supposed to kill him, but Kabbalah says it refers to Atzilus. There, it's a rarefied world of what? Of kedusha, relatively speaking. But Bria, Rubi Toiv, and Bria, it's mainly good, but by minority is Klippa, Yeshes. Al Shabasiya Rubeira, and then there's an equal in Yitzir, it's equal in Asiya. The majority, what dominates is Klippa. Therefore, this world and all that fills it is called the world of Klippas, and the other side, but Hashem, Gavrin by the wicked, have dominate. Like he says in Tanya, just quoting him from Perek Vav, B'Shem Eitzchaim, the name of the Eitzchaim. That's all the way it is, mitzad, Uizgestelt, as it were, laid out the whole process, the whole map of creation, the whole ladder of divinity, laid out mitzad milamayla. So there's a ladder, and the higher rungs of the ladder are more refined, and the lower rungs are less refined, and invested in them is higher sparks. That's the way it is, as Hashem laid it out. Now comes the avodah. Now comes our avodah. Our avodah has to start with the bottom up. First, we have to take the most unrefined psoilus, the most coarse. Now, what is that? So this is the avodah tzaddikim. Then there's a avodah about tshuva that can even take care of this. But the most rejected psoilus, there's a level that can't even be refined. You can't even use. These are things that are forbidden. When the Torah says something is forbidden, a food or a relationship or a place or a plant before the 3 years Orla, that's because the klippa there has to be rejected, can't be refined. Tzarech lezorka, you've got to cast it away. That's mitzvah sleisase. Vazen nemar v'sashlev mitzulisom kol chatoisom, and you should throw into the depths of the water all their sins. Tashlich referring to that's what we do. Tashlich. So that has to be rejected. And the good, it's opposite movement. And the good is sent into Eilam. And then there's greater refinement and greater avodah in mitzvahs asay gufa, higher levels of avodah, where you do the action and then you do it with emotion, then you do it with understanding. You bring to bear to the avodah as you engage the world in a more refined way. So first there's the rejection of those sparks that cannot be elevated again, that Al Tshuva can. And that's analogous to taking the excrement, as it were, and using it as fertilizer. That's the Avodah Tshuva, but that's not the regular Avodah, but it's not going to the, he's pratim now. But he's going in general is that's the Avodah on the Matala. So it starts with Maisa, and then you have to bring, first thing is to do. Then he has to add to that his emotions. Then to whatever degree is Seichel. And as he grows in his Yiddishkeit, he brings to his mitzvahs and his engagement in the world greater and greater refinement, starting with behavior and then emotional refinement. That's the whole avodah of Sfiras Omer. And to some degree, the mind's refinement. But even before that, just using your mind to learn Torah should be samachayim. It should be a elixir of life, a refinement, to whatever degree. And he sends Atzilus even higher still. Higher still means that he serves with the Rotzen and with Tainug. So through his avodah from below to above, even Atzilus, why? Because he is serving the Eibishter with the Makifim of Chai and Yechida. Atzilus corresponds to Chachma. So serving the Eibishter with these deeper levels of the soul causes an elevation to the parallel which is Atzilus Sharigam. Atzilus Eilam won't believe Atzilus, as lofty as it is. It's a finite world. It's a world of Chachma. By the person elevating all of these sparks, the iris, the greater the iris, the lower they fall. So he starts with a mice and then ascends ever higher. So he causes an elevation even in Atzilus. Certainly he elevates beyond. Just something requires, he said before, that in Eilam Asiyah, the Tainug, he said before the opposite, right? That the highest, that's the point, that the high Nitzutz Kedusha fall lower. I just described an Avodah starts with Maisa and then with it's not a stira. I'll just leave the explanation for it in a moment, but it's not a stira.
Back to yesterday's question, when things are falling, he goes from Midas to Seichel to Rotzen to Tainug, and he doesn't mention Machshava Dibur Maisa. He only says Machshava Dibur Maisa when you come Lamata Lamaila. Lamaila Lamata.
He didn't even say it there. He didn't actually say
he
it.
Did not say it. But even but Bais Lamata Lamaila, I mean, you're saying it through the Machshava Dibur Maisa, etc., etc. But he doesn't address the descent of Machshava Dibur Maisa. He only perhaps alludes to the aliyah through Machshava Dibur Maisa.
Well, it's implied. I mean, the answer to that is it's implied. Shasi Rubayra, Oilam Aklipus, Sitrachar Hashem, given by that's negative behavior. That's behavior. That's Maisa.
No, but he said that the makif of a tainug is kaviyachol corrupted in Asiya.
Right,
and it's rectified through Machshava Dibur Maisa. Correct.
Not pashut. I'm saying we have to reconcile it.
I'm saying I'm just repeating what you said, but he does not discuss the corruption of Machshava Dibur Maisa on the descent. Doesn't allude to it.
No, he does.
He starts with Midas and Atzilus.
When he gets
and then he goes down to Bria, to Machshava, and then Yitzir Rotzen, and in Asiya he discusses the the corruption of the person's tainug, but he never discusses the corruption of machshavah dibur ma'aseh. Is it because machshavah dibur ma'aseh there is no corruption?
There is. That's
of course. But he. Okay, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I know. This has to be explained. Like this is a loose end here. It's a loose end.
Okay.
Tzarich iyun a little bit, and hopefully we'll come up with something. We'll try and research a little bit. The main source, I think, is Derech Mitzvisecha.
Iron base. Footnote 8. Maybe that's only the lechem in ours, lechem in the Shemayim.
No, yeah, no, that's that prat. But here the whole seder of Birurim.
Or 9.
Yeah, I know why. Okay, we'll try. Based on I don't know when. We'll try look further into this. Okay. Eis Daled. Eis Daled. We hinde ba'avodas Adam gufa. Now, in avodas Adam, which we're talking about now. This itself has two ways of birur, from above to below. How is this an avodas Adam? That's and then there's avodas mitzad haguf. That's melamata l'mayla. I know avodas haneshama. What's the second one? Avodas haneshama ba'guf. So you met the neshama and the guf al yidei stapshusa benefesh bahamis. Not talking pure neshama avodah. We're talking about the neshama's avodah as it's invested in the nefesh bahamis, as he now explains. The hine avodah is haneshama mitzad atzma. Even shuruach adam mi'oila l'mayla. So the pure avodah is haneshama since the nature, according to the pasuk here. Ruach Adam naturally is drawn heavenwards, upwards. That's the neshama. So the avodah there is not in engagement, but in ever-increasing light, not in descending and transforming, but in light. And therefore the birur, because this great light happens not through engagement, but as a matter of course, we'll see in more detail. That's a birur milamayla lamata. So just an analogy would be a person that comes to a place, and how does he inspire the environment? He sits and davens, and he's an incredible example. He's not engaging anybody, talking to anybody, but he radiates oil, and therefore it's pure neshama. So he elevates the environment, but it's milamayla lamata. It's avodas haneshama. Ashenkin avodah mitzad haguf, but the avodah mitzad haguf he ba'ofen shaneshama is labeshes menefesh bahamis. So here it's not his avodah in davening and learning, but his avodah as he engaged in nefesh bahamis, the world. Shaluach habeim yeredes lamata. The behema, the spirit of the behema is drawn downwards. We're talking about Ben Shem Tov and the stories. It's a whole profile on him here, and the author is extolling his humility. See, it tells a story here that once that Mendel Futafas asked him, it says in Nechsidus, the Gemara says at the age of 20. So this is halacha that a person is able to becomes fully responsible. It's about einshin as far as the heavenly court is concerned. And Belamata, as far as the earthly person is concerned, here a person is granted the ability, the permission rather, to, as an inheritor, to sell and release property. Till then, the Bezdin tries to control it. He's not mature enough, but at the age of 20, he's a moicher, v'koine b'nichsei aviv. So Mendel says that he asks eventually turn 20, I guess, do no. And then Baruch, Chassidus explains Baruch is what that means. It's maturity. Turn 20, ask him so. You feel so the bench is responsible by behemoth. There's no difference in 20, 30, 50. That's what a mensch, a person is at age of 20, it's maturity. Similar to what Mashpia said this, but talking about old age, says you look in the farm, and you see that the older cow is standing there maturely. The younger one is frisking and jumping. It says no difference. It's just, he doesn't have any koyach anymore. The older one is just old and fat, so he can't jump around. It's not a sign of maturity. Just because he's quieter and a little slower and a little more less noisy and rambunctious, there's elbe behemoth. No, not this koyach. So there's no strength to jump around anymore. That's not what maturity means. Okay, continuing. Shouldn't delude ourselves. But I want to add something to all this. The Deir HaShvi, you have to be careful. We don't do well with criticism. We don't do well with criticism. This is the language of Deir HaShishi a little bit. We don't do well. It has to be accentuating the positive and channeling it, and not that we're ignoring or denying our shortcomings and faults, but that's not the emphasis. The emphasis is the positive, and it's in everything. It's a huge revolution of the Deir HaShvi, of the Rebbe's whole way. I don't know if you saw this. Just floating around on the internet now. You've heard of Bess Meyerson. Bess Meyerson was Miss America in 1945, the first and only Jewish girl to become Miss America. She wanted to become a great, very talented person, a politician, an activist, very colorful figure, a writer, an actress, all kinds of things. So she'd come to the Rebbe. Now I'm trying to find her own story, because yesterday when Yossi Davis brought the papers, my eye caught, they interviewed her. That's somebody they knew that, and she told of a story that she had. I didn't read it. He went. But then Mashgacha Prat is the same day that he brings the newspaper, the Gimel Thomas newspapers, on the internet, as she brings her daughter. She brings her daughter to the Rebbe. First of all, just amazing to see how she leans forward by the Rebbe's face. The Rebbe, doesn't flinch at all. But the beauty is this: the Rebbe reminds her that she's a queen. This is mind-blowing. Beauty queen. Beauty passion. That's the whole antithesis of Yiddishkeit, objectifying the body. I don't have to tell you. You think they would totally reject that? Totally. No. This is 1945, and he's reminding you about Shkochim. So now to use this, of course, in Kedusha, this is such an incredible example of everything in the Elam has in Kedusha. And then she says to the Rebbe that her daughter's a writer. The Rebbe says, a writer of what? So she says somewhat, the daughter, she's wearing a tichon, and Bess is wearing a tichon, completely covering her hair, by the way. The daughter says somewhat, bashfully, what's the term? Bashfully? Bashfully. Movies. She's not a novelist, she writes movies. So the Rebbe tells us that certainly you will see to it that when you write, to promote tznius in a way of chastity and modesty. This is the seventh. This is our generation, especially our children. The put down. Nothing should be nothing. This was the language of on oneself and on the other person. It worked then, I guess, but now it's the elevation. Maybe we're getting an answer to our question here. That in this world, in our generation, which is Elam Asi and the lowest level, you've got to affirm the tainug, you've got to affirm the self-esteem, you've got to affirm the value of the person. Some kind of connection in between. On the one hand, it's all about the action, but in the action is the tainug. And the tainug is the essential value, the sovereign value of the person, your behavior, what you do, what you do, your mitzvah is a sovereign, irreplaceable value, in which the Eibush says tainug, in which you should find tainug. In your essential worth. That's part of this, to understand this tension. The Haza, yet here is invested what? The highest clip is tainug. The highest clip is of Toya. Somewhat clear? Oh, it's already late. Okay. We'll continue based on Hashem tomorrow. So